noise in the background, it's coming from the guys next door that are cutting up about a 300-year-old oak tree, unfortunately, that fell during the storm. All right. Let me get situated here. I'm going to flip over so you can see my screen. Okay, let me tell you what we're going to do today, what I'm trying to do, okay, with my broken glasses. I'm trying to go back over, summarize in some sense, everything we've done in church history up until this point. Because we fell off with COVID last year, or earlier in the year in the March, April timeframe. And so we haven't met really in almost 6 months, unfortunately. And history is like many other things. To be good at it, you got to do it often. So it's kind of like if I go out and I say, you know what, today I'm going to learn how to play tennis. And I go out and I pick up the tennis racket and I'm hitting the tennis ball. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go do it again tomorrow. And I keep doing it. Well, I get a whole lot better at playing tennis because I remember a lot of what I've done. I have muscle memory, etc. Well, for us, quite often, history is something we need to read over and over and over again, because each time we read the story, the narrative of history, it's kind of like we get a little bit deeper into it and we can see it a little bit better. And all of a sudden now we hear somebody's name, we may think of their picture, or we hear about a time period, we may imagine ourselves being there. And so when we talk about all these different events, it isn't something that we don't really remember. It's something, oh yeah, I remember that. And I remember this person. We kind of envision ourselves being there. Like when I say the Hagia Sophia, well, most people don't even know what the Hagia Sophia is, right? They don't know it's the great cathedral of the Eastern Roman Empire, the Roman Empire for that matter, for a long time, and how big it is and what it sounds like inside of it and what it looks like. But for us, when we hear that people were preaching at the Hagia Sophia, or we hear that name, this image pops into our mind. We can enter into those beautiful doors and we see the marble and we see the iconography and we can hear the sounds of it. So we participate in that history. So that's what we're trying to do by going over a few things. Also, we've had new people join us. And so we're going to kind of take them back through our story as well, so they can kind of catch up with us and see where we are. And also during this time, you're going to be learning things during the modern period and the postmodern period. And y'all are going over some of that in some of your other classes. And we'll get into those time frames as well, or those philosophical periods. Okay. Anybody have any questions? No questions. Okay. Let me go over here. I'm going to switch you to my screen because I'm smart and I learned how to do it. Okay, I'm not that smart. I didn't learn. Okay, I guess I did. Okay. All right. So just kind of going back over history. The word itself is from the Greek, and I just lost it, historia. Go back. Where'd it go? There we go. Okay. It means inquiring knowledge or inquired by investigation. Or it could be the study of past events, particularly in human affairs. For us, we're studying church history, though. That's the main thing we're looking at. A written account of the history of the church. So that's what we're working on. Now, we talked about last time, we kind of went over the Old Testament, and what took place from Adam and Eve. They went creation, fall, flood, nations, Abraham, Joseph, into captivity in Egypt. Moses rises up. Moses delivers the people. They settle the new land of Israel. They have judges set up because they don't have kings. People say, I want a king, I want a king, I want to be like everybody else. He said, okay, I'll give you Saul. Saul served God with his half heart. David served God with his whole heart. Solomon was a giant mess. After Solomon, the kingdom was divided into two places, the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom. Northern kingdom's Israel, southern kingdom's Judah. The Assyrians come in, conquer and capture. The Babylonians come in, conquer, capture, and deport. And so all of a sudden now the Jews are living in exile. They return, they rebuild the temple, they rebuild the walls, the people restored spiritually. And now they're there and they're awaiting the coming of the Messiah. There you go, the whole Old Testament. Now, we know that when all this was taking place, events happened between the prophet Malachi and the coming of St. John the Baptist during that period of time. So what we're going to pick up on right now is the Persians have been defeated, but now we're in the Hellenistic period. And the reason why I like starting there is because when we go into the New Testament, what language is the New Testament written in? Y'all know, what's the language of the New Testament, the original language that it's written in? Anybody?
Is it in Greek?
Yes, in Greek. That's correct. Thank you, PB. So that raises a giant question, right? Why would Hebrew people, right, the people of Israel, Jewish people, why would they be writing in Greek? And why would they be speaking Greek? Well, we're going to go through this little journey together and we'll find out why, right? Okay. So we're going to begin with the Hellenistic period from 332 to 63 BC. Now, what does BC mean? Or some people say now BCE.
Before Christ.
Before Christ. That's good, John. So before Christ, or as some people say, before the Common Era. Now, Elizabeth Olson, wave to me. Okay. How did you explain that last time? You remember? You explained BC and AD in a certain way. Do you remember? You don't remember?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, I can't remember what you said, but it was pretty savvy the way you said it. You know, how it was going from greater numbers to lesser numbers. Then Christ enters into the world at his nativity. Then it goes from lesser numbers to greater numbers. So it's declining till it gets to Christ and begins to increase, right? So 332 to 63 BC looks like it's going backwards, but it's really getting closer to the time of Christ. And then from Christ, we start over again and move forward. Okay. Alexander the Great. Now, what an interesting character, right? We've studied him. And Aristotle was his tutor, and Aristotle was a great philosopher. And Alexander the Great had a certain philosophy himself, but he was also a great general. And so all this kind of comes together and it conflates into this person of Alexander the Great, who defeated the Persian Empire. Now, here's what Aristotle looks like. Can somebody tell me something about Aristotle? Who is he a student of? Anybody remember? Plato? Do you remember we talked about the great philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, and Plato being a student of Socrates? Okay, we'll keep going. Not worry about the Gordian knot today. Now, y'all remember this is Alexander on his great horse, Bucephalus. And they said that when Alexander rode around on his horse, he was approximately 13 feet tall from the top of his helmet to the ground. So he was an extremely imposing figure and very young. He dies at the age of 32 or 33, and he's conquered most all the known world at this time. So the Greek Empire, at its height, this is how much land it covered. So we can see over here, just so we always have a point of reference, this is Greece and Athens, and this is where Constantinople is today. Here's Jerusalem. Aleppo, we still hear a lot about Aleppo and things that go on there. Antioch being in this region. Egypt's down here, so this is Africa. The great city of Alexandria would have been about right here. But you can see this is most of the Mediterranean and beyond, so it's a huge empire. Now, y'all going to tell me that story real quick. Why did Alexander the Great not smash and bash and destroy the people of Israel, the Jewish people, when he rode into Jerusalem? Who remembers? Savannah's over here waving her hands saying, I do, I do, I do. Who remembers? All right.
Didn't he have a
Huh?
Didn't he have a vision or something?
Oh, yeah, you're close, PB. You're close. You're real close.
Like an angel told him not to destroy the Israelites, or
Oh,
he would be punished.
Oh, PB, you're so close. You're so close. Yeah. All right.
I just don't remember exactly what it was.
That's right. So we have to go. You're so close. We're going back into the story, right? So we can find ourselves there again. Okay. Alexander the Great is marching on Jerusalem. Y'all remember the priest, the high priest that led the people out to meeting?
Forgot his name, but
Simon the Just, right? So Simon and the sages, all these people go out to meet Alexander the Great because he's coming in to destroy Jerusalem. That's what they all think. Go ahead, John.
didn't God appear to him before?
Kinda, yeah. You're close. So when Alexander the Great's marching in on Jerusalem, Simon the Just, the high priest, and the people go out, and Alexander gets off the horse, Bucephalus, and he bows to the high priest. And everybody is in amazement because why in the world would Alexander the Great be bowing to the high priest, Simon, and the people there in Israel, in Jerusalem? And he said that Simon's face was the face of the angel he saw every time that led him into battle and made him victorious. So he allowed Jerusalem to kind of maintain its own rule and own identity. And so what did the people do in response to the graciousness of Alexander the Great towards them? Y'all remember what the people did?
They named their kids after him?
They named all their children after him that year, Alexander, Alexandra. So that's why today you still have a lot of Hebrew people with the name Alexander, Alexandra. It really doesn't make any sense outside of this portion of history that we're studying. So they set up a tax system. So the Hebrew people kind of lived with a great respect of Alexander the Great, and Alexander the Great with a great respect of them. They named their children after him, and by doing so, this also opened up the Greek language to the Jewish people because they began to take on other Greek names as well. And so this is one way the Greek language entered into the Jewish people. Make sense? It kind of opened the door for it. Because remember, the New Testament is written in Greek, and we're trying to figure out how exactly this happens. Well, this is how it happens. It's unfolding before us. So, let me go back here real quick. Now, Alexander had generals that ruled over his kingdom. And the one Ptolemaic, he ruled out of Egypt from, sorry, my screen's giving me fits. Get back up here. 320 to 198 BC. Now his name, Ptolemy Soter, means savior. Alexandria was the capital of his area where he ruled, which is in outside of Egypt. And he ruled Judah until 198 BC. Okay. Now, also during this period of time, the Old Testament books that were written in Greek, or excuse me, were written in Hebrew, were translated into Greek. And so for us, we read the Greek Septuagint. Now, the true Greek Septuagint, which Septuagint means 70 because about 70 people translated the Old Testament during this period from Hebrew to Greek. And so the word Septuagint means 70. But really, when we say Septuagint, we're talking about the Torah, the law, the books of the law. Now, who knows what the Old Testament Torah is, or the books of the law? Which ones are they? I'll give you a hint. It's the first 5. Who can name them? Go ahead, Samuel.
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy.
Deuteronomy, yeah. That makes up what we call the Torah or the law. And so when we say, technically, when we say Septuagint, we're talking about the Greek translation of the Torah. Now, the other books in the Old Testament, or that made up the Old Testament scriptures, were translated into Greek as well. And quite often we just call the whole thing Septuagint. Okay. Among the Greek-speaking Jews, this Bible became a standard text serving both Judaism and the early church for centuries. So again, with Alexander the Great comes Hellenism, comes the Greek language, comes a translation of the Bible from the Old Testament from Hebrew to Greek. The New Testament writings are in Greek. And so you have a lot of this Hellenistic influence, Greek influence, during the time of Christ when he enters into this world. Okay? A little bit later, we had the Seleucids. Okay? Their dynasty began around 313. It was Alexander's general Seleucus Nicator, which means Nika means conqueror. Antioch was the capital of his dynasty. And he got his rule from the Ptolemies in 198. The leader here, the general, was Antiochus IV Epiphanes. And Epiphany means, the revealing of God on earth. That's the same Greek word that we use. We talk about epiphany or theophany. Okay. Now, he sought worship, which was problematic. And the Jewish people did not have a very good relationship with Antiochus Epiphanes IV. And what he did was something very, very horrible. He kind of took what Alexander the Great had set up, that been carried on, and he turned the worship of the temple over to Zeus. And for 3 years, pigs were sacrificed by Greeks on Israel's holy altars, the holy altar. That's not a good thing, because Jewish people and pigs don't get along very well. For the Jewish people, a pig is a very unclean animal. To us, he just makes really good bacon, right? But for the Jewish people, unclean animal. So to take the temple of God, remember the second temple period, to take the temple of God, turn it over to the worship of Zeus, and sacrifice pigs on the altar, guess what, PB? You're gonna make somebody real mad, aren't you? Can't do that, can you? You'll make somebody upset. When you sacrifice pigs on the altar, it's not going to go over well, is it? It's not going to go over well at all. Okay? And it didn't go over well because it led to what's known as the Maccabean Wars. Okay? Now, the Hasidim were pious ones, and for a while they passively revolted against Antiochus Epiphanes. Okay? They just were in rebellion against him, but not warfare. Then all of a sudden, another group rises up, another family, and they've had it. Mattathias and his sons, Judas, Simon, and Jonathan. And they became known as the Maccabees. And why is that? What does Maccabee mean? If you see it, you'll read it, you'll see it. What does Maccabee mean? Or Maccabeus? Hammer. Hammer. Yeah. So the Maccabees were the hammers of God. And so they were going to rid themselves of Antiochus Epiphanes IV, take back the temple, take back the area of Jerusalem. And so they launched guerrilla campaigns to expel the Greeks from the land. In other words, they wouldn't fight them head on. They couldn't defeat them that way. So they would have surprise attacks where you would have Greek soldiers walking through an area of the city, and they would have others hiding. They would jump out, assault them, and eventually, over a period of time, the Maccabees gained control of the area of Jerusalem and beyond. Okay? In 164, Judas Maccabees gained the temple precincts and cleansed the sanctuary, inaugurating what we know as Hanukkah, also referred to as the Festival of Lights. Now, out of just curiosity, Hanukkah is the Jewish feast of Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights, is celebrated the same time of year as we celebrate what?
Christmas.
Christmas. That's right. So the Festival of Lights, Hanukkah, celebrate the same time as we celebrate Christmas. Now this is Israel under the Maccabees. You can see it's divided up into different regions. And this tells you who was overseeing everything. But basically take back most of what was known as the Promised Land, originally given over to Abraham and the people of Israel. And this inaugurated what was known as the Hasmonean dynasty. Now, I'm going to send y'all a study guide for some of this, and we'll have a little exam here in the near future, just kind of going over some of these broader concepts. Okay, a family of Mattathias and heirs. In a generation, Judaism found itself torn in three ways, though. Okay? So during the Hasmonean dynasty, what quite often happens is when a group of people, they get together, and they may not have everything in common, but they'll come together to defeat a greater enemy or a greater foe. But once they do that, then they turn around and cannibalize each other. But during this time frame, that Judaism is torn in three different ways. There's three major sections, okay? You have the Hellenized Jews. That means the Jews that were heavily influenced by Greek thought, Greek philosophy, okay? You had the Hasmoneans, who were the Maccabees. This was just a family name. They had power in Jerusalem. Get back over here. Okay. Then you had, that thing likes to run off on me. Every time I hit a button, it takes off, okay? But during this time also, from 141 to 63, you had the rise of the Sadducees in the temple. Y'all have heard the Sadducees? They're always giving Jesus a hard time, the followers of Jesus a hard time. So during this period, you had the rise of the Sadducees in the temple. the Hasidim, the pious ones, who called for religious purity and warned of the corruptive dangers of power. Then you had the Pharisees. Now, the Pharisees, it was a lay movement in the synagogues, and they focused really hard on the study and application of Scripture. Now, let's go back to this just for a second. How many temples were there at this time? Jewish temples. How many temples? Do y'all know? One. There can only be one temple, right? So we had the first temple is destroyed and it's rebuilt. And now the people are living in Second Temple Judaism during this period. But there's only one temple on the Temple Mount. And so that's where people would have to make pilgrimages, because remember, the Jewish people from the Assyrians and the Babylonians had been scattered all over the Mediterranean and beyond. And so these Jewish people, if they were in Italy, or if they were in Gaul, which is France, or if they were in Thrace, wherever it may be, from being scattered by the Assyrians all over their empire, they would come together to study. They couldn't offer sacrifice because that can only be done in the temple. So it's during this period of time you see them build what's known as synagogues. And so the synagogues were all over. Wherever the Jewish people were, they would gather together and build a synagogue. And what did they have they could do? They had the Torah, they had the law, they had the prophets, so they would read the scriptures all the time. And so with the Pharisees and later the scribes as well, they became experts in the study of scripture. Okay, makes sense? So you have the Sadducees, really the Pharisees, and the scribes. The Sadducees are in the temple, the Pharisees are in the synagogue. The Pharisees and the scribes focus really on the study of scripture, and they're kind of like the religious leaders of the day. They influence politically as well. Then you also had the Zealots. And the Zealots were a radical religious sect, and they wanted to overthrow Roman rule by violence. We see this in Luke chapter 6 as well. So you had all kind of different people living and dwelling in the land of Israel at this time. They did not all see eye to eye, nor did they all have the same idea about Hellenism, about religious things, because the Sadducees and the Pharisees were at odds with each other. Then you had the Zealots that wanted to overthrow everything during this period of Roman rule, which just about to begin. Okay. Now the Roman period begins in 63 BC. Okay. And Pompey is the one who actually conquers Jerusalem and enters into the most holy place and begins to defile the temple as well. I'm frozen. Okay, I'll wait. Tell me when I'm unfrozen. Am I moving? Still frozen? How about now? Okay. Now back? Okay. Okay, did you miss me? Okay. Sorry about that. Now, during this period of time, we're going back to the Roman period, okay? Begins in 63 BC with Pompey's conquest of the area of Israel. I keep saying it different ways. But there was a league of 10 cities there called the Decapolis. And he promised this region that was like on the kind of the eastern side of the nation of Israel, that they would never have to live under Jewish rule again. And he conquered Jerusalem and entered the most holy place. Now, Pompey wasn't a very nice guy, but many of the Roman emperors were not. But if we go back and we look in the Bible itself, we see that there's different Roman emperors that are mentioned. One is Augustus, okay? And we see that Augustus ruled during the time when Christ entered into this world by way of his incarnation. So, a decree went out during the reign of Caesar Augustus that, the census should be taken of all the inhabited earth. So we see his name mentioned. Then we also see the name of Tiberius mentioned, Tiberius Caesar. So now when we go back and we look at everything, we've got, okay, again, the nation of Israel is settled there, the Hebrew people in this area, and they've been influenced by many things, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, but specifically they've been influenced by the Greeks. They've adopted their language, they've adopted many of their customs, they've adopted a lot of their philosophy. And now they've been invaded by Rome under Pompey, and now they're living under Roman rule. So you have Greek influence, Roman rule in the Hebrew land. And that's when Christ enters into this world, and he enters in to Bethlehem in this type of what we would say context, or during this period when all this is going on. Now, anybody have any questions? Okay, we're just overviewing what we've done in the past a little bit. So this is what the Roman Empire looks like. The lighter orange color is AD 14. It's kind of neat to look at it because it goes all the way over to where Belgium and France and Spain is today. Then we see it's Northern Africa. Carthage will become one of the major key areas in Christendom. Quick quiz. See if I remember this. Alexandria, we'll come back to my question in a second, was the center of learning for centuries. Right here. And it was set up by Alexander the Great. It bears his name, right? Alexandria. And something was there that something was there at one time for many, many years. If we had access to this, it would probably change a lot about how we understand history.
The Library of Alexandria.
The Library of Alexandria, that's right. What happened to it?
Didn't it get broken by people? Got burnt down. Oh,
Yeah, even worse. What happened to the Library of Alexandria?
It got burned.
It burned. That's right. It burned down. What a horrible loss. I couldn't imagine the books that were in the library in Alexandria. Now here's Egypt. Can y'all see my mouse moving around? See it? Okay. In this area is through here, where the people that were in bondage in Egypt under Moses, this is where they crossed the Red Sea and eventually settled in this area in here, right? And this is where Jerusalem is, where the temple was. Over here again is where Byzantium or Istanbul is today. Here's Rome, that was a capital of the empire. So this area we call the Mediterranean area. Quick question. Who was crowned emperor of the Roman Empire in York, England in the early 4th century? Right here. Who was crowned emperor of the Roman Empire in York, England, in this area? That's where York is.
Charlemagne.
Huh?
Charlemagne.
No, this is early 4th century. Charlemagne's like 8th century. Early 4th. Who was a game changer for the Christians?
Constantine.
Constantine, yeah. He was crowned right here in York, England. Yeah, in the early 4th century. Okay. So this is our map of the Roman Empire. Okay. That gets us up to where we are today. Let me get back out. And there we go. That kind of brings me where I kind of want to stop. Okay. Unless y'all have any questions. If you have any questions, I'm going to kind of end it around right here today. Because now what we're going to do is we're going to hop over into the New Testament period. Right? Now, we'll talk about, Christ has entered into the world. Everything changes. And there's a certain book in the Bible that tells me about the first 30 years of the history of the church. What book would that be? What's the historical book in the New Testament? I need a Delat. I see a Delat. Go ahead. Acts. The Acts of the Apostles, right? And it covers the first 30 years of the history of the church. So within that, I know PB knew the answer to, within that, we have two major people or two major figures that we kind of look at and study. Who are they? One takes the gospel to the Gentiles, the other one takes the gospel to the Jews.
Peter and Paul.
Peter and Paul, that's right. So we're going to look at the New Testament, and we'll kind of look at how it's divided up and what the gospel books are and the book of history. Then we'll look at the epistles, and we'll look at the book of Revelation or the Apocalypse. But then we're going to also kind of look at what happened during that 30-year period of history, church history, and we'll watch and kind of see Paul's missionary journeys as he goes all around the Mediterranean and ultimately into Rome. You know what's really interesting about those missionary journeys to me? Okay, I'll tell you. If you go and you look at all those places where St. Paul is traveling, and many of the other apostles as well, that's where our churches are as Orthodox Christians. They're still there. So that ties us all the way back, not just from where we are right now in Shreveport, Louisiana, as Orthodox Christians. We can go all the way back and see Paul's missionary journeys and the other apostles and see ourselves tied to those missionary efforts by St. Paul himself. I tell you what's really, really cool is, and Father Daniel can print this off as well, and I use it quite often when I'm talking to people that are interested in the church. I can go print off the apostolic succession documents for the Church of Antioch, and we can go all the way back and see how from St. Peter being in Antioch, we can trace it like Ignatius and all these other bishops and the Antiochian apostolic succession. In other words, from St. Peter in Antioch to the next primate or major bishop to the next major bishop, all the way down to Metropolitan Joseph today. You can trace that all the way back to St. Peter, him being in Antioch. So we're tied to the history of the apostles, and we're tied to St. Paul's missionary journeys and St. Peter's work and the other apostles as well, because we're still part of that church. So their history is our history, and it still lives on this day. Okay. Any questions? All right. Y'all did great, as you always do. Thank God. And I look forward to being with you next week when we start entering into the period of the New Testament. All right. The blessing of the Lord and his mercies be upon you. God bless. Take care.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.